Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to a Media and Communication webinar. I'm Rodrigo Silva. I'm the Communications Manager at Cogitatio and your moderator for today. In the past years, media industry has changed in many ways, economically, in terms of swift technological evolution, the structure of media companies themselves, also the creation, distribution, consumption of media content has also changed dramatically. But what changes are we talking about? How do they impact the industry, society, and what can we expect for the future? We have gathered an expert panel today to answer these questions, potentially find new ones. The webinar is based on an issue that we published earlier this year in our open access journal, Media and Communication. I will be sharing the link with you very soon. Today's panel is composed of Salla-Maaria, Laaksonen, and Mikko, Villi, co-editors of the issue, Jessica Edlom and Mathias-Felipe, de-Lima-Santos, both contributing authors of the issue. And we also have the pleasure of welcoming Mark Deuze to provide some comments, some remarks after we hear from our editors and authors. Now, attendees, some information for you. So this is the order of presentations for today, okay? Mikko will go first as co-editor and Salla-Maaria will talk after. The editors will be followed by Jessica and then Matthias, and then we will be hearing from Mark the final remarks. After that, we will jump to the Q&A session. So as attendees, you are able to write your questions throughout the whole session to our speakers. They will be asked after Mark's presentation. You can write the questions, upvote the questions. We kindly ask you to also indicate the person to whom you are directing the question. Also, during the whole session, the chat is open for you all to share your comments, your remarks as well, your ideas. Get in touch, let's interact with each other. And without further delay, I will now pass the word to Mikko and wish you all a very pleasant webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodrigo, and thank you all for coming to this webinar, and of course as an audience, and also for our speakers. Just look, yeah, checking the slides. So of course the first question is, why did we decide to launch this thematic issue? And well, as you probably know, the media industry has undergone significant economic, structural, and technological changes during the past few decades. And along with the industry, also the practices of media work have changed and evolved, and at large, what can be defined as media work. Media work needs to be studied in this rapidly developing media and communication landscape, and to support this aim, we wanted to build an inclusive yet coherent special issue to offer several different approaches on media work. One way of defining media work is there on the slide, and building understanding of media work, defining it. Mark Deuze has been extremely influential, so we are very happy to have him here today as discussant. And an important motivation backdrop for the special issue is that the practice of media work are now adopted also in other industries than the traditional media industry settings, such as in news, media, and journalism. The new forms of media work are emerging in other industries that also aim to communicate with their audiences. These include, for example, organizations that strive to produce professional media-like content as a component of their strategic communication. Also, the increasing significance of social media requires employees in many different organizations to possess media skills. And these expanding contexts raise a question of what media work is like when it is done outside the media industry, and what principles are then driving it. And we'll hear about such novel aspects of media work today in Jessica Edlom's talk. And of course, we hope that the special issue serves not just academics, but also those practicing and managing media work in different organizations. The 10 selected articles cover 3 main themes. new forms of media work in media organizations, emerging forms of social media work, and a typical organizational context for media work. The first 4 contributions to this issue approach media work in the context of more traditional media organizations and journalism. Mathias-Felipe, de-Lima-Santos discusses the blurring of professional boundaries and hybrid profiles of media workers in a news media organization, in this case ProPublica, and we will hear more about this in a minute. Converging media work can also be detected in business journalism, where a new hybrid professional ethos combines managerial practices with journalistic ideals. This is the focus of the article by Johanna Suhonen. Naturally, media work has been influenced by the digital transition. Salvador Reyes de Cosar, Marta Pérez Escolar, and Pablo Navassos Tua have conducted a systematic review to examine what the literature suggests about the digital skills that new professionals should acquire in the field of journalism. And as the 4th article, Sari Virta and Nanno Malminen explore the management of complexities, organizational tensions, the dualities in cross-sector collaboration in a media cluster, in their case, Media Polis, a Finnish center and network for media companies and organizations. And now I hand over the screen and voice to my co-editor, Salla.
Thanks, Mikko. So indeed, a second big theme in our article, and obviously a big kind of change that we've seen in the context of media work during the past decades is social media and the emerging field of social media work. So we see how in many fields, ranging from politics to academia to cultural industries, the use of social media is bringing new aspects to new forms of media work. It emerges as a tool to reach audiences, and it has kind of become a standard part of any forms of planned and strategic communication. And we could say that social media work resembles media work in many ways. It's also a form of planning, producing, and distributing content for media, but just in this case for social media. And that is why the platform technology and the platform design seem to kind of bring new colors to the palette through the related cultural practices that are kind of eminent for these platforms. So most importantly, it seems that social media platforms generate new professional roles and practices for media work. Namely, we have witnessed the emergence of new digital professions, social media workers, social media managers, editors, community managers, who didn't exist in the previous forms of media. And the main goal of these workers is essentially to generate visibility and different forms of audience engagement for their employers. Again, be them brands, companies, the media, politicians, musicians. And these goals of social media work are specifically introduced and reinforced by the platform logics and the cultures on those platforms. So, for example, we see how the logic of engagement is being enforced by the overarching idea of participatory culture that is very strongly connected to social media. And this is something we will hear more about in the next presentation. But in the special issue, it's also discussed in the article by Badham and Mykkänen in the context of journalistic media and how they engage with their audiences. And interestingly, while social media positions are being increasingly common and more visible in society, and their work is also becoming increasingly visible in society and across our media feeds, yet their labor tends to remain invisible behind the branded accounts. And this is something what Brooke Duffy and Megan Soni in their article argue and kind of put forth this claim that social media work is actually configured by a visibility paradox. It's a lot about visibility, but the workers and the labor still remain invisible. The third big theme for our issue focuses on the typical organizational context for media work, as Mikko mentioned in the beginning. So here we look at the further expanding boundaries of media work as it is being conducted in organizational settings outside the typical journalistic media organizations. Again, ranging, for example, from public sector to academia and schools and education. First, we observe how practices of media work are being adopted by existing organizations in other existing fields. how journalistic values, ideas of newsworthiness, news-like production styles are being adopted as means to build credibility for branded communication. This is, for example, observed in the media channels founded by a public sector organization in the article by Maria Grafström and Hanna-Sofia Rehnberg in our special issue. And second, we also observe the emergence of completely novel organization types that start to develop their own forms of media work. In the special issue, we have, for example, an article that considers a non-profit news media startup, Science Media Center Germany, which Christopher Buschow and his colleagues characterize as a field repair organization. So it's an organization that is situated between journalistic media and science organizations, and it works to kind of build collaboration between them to do high quality media work, and works to compensate for the deficits identified in legacy media. And another interesting and quite controversial example of the contexts of media work is counter media, which, as Olli Seuri and Kim Ramsted show in their article, is a form of media work that copies and remixes content and also practices from the traditional media and the more traditional media work, and actually turns it into a form of political activism. So where are we with media work here? Where are we going? We suggest that, first of all, as the importance of media and different mediated practices in society are increasing, so does the importance of media work. It is spreading to new contexts where new actor roles emerge, we have new practices, we have new purposes for media work. And most importantly, and perhaps worryingly, it seems that media work becomes increasingly intertwined with different forms of strategic and branded communication. And this effectively introduces new tensions and a lot of new ethical questions to the field, both for academics and practitioners, and maybe actually to all of us as some kinds of media workers. How should and could we identify the constantly developing logics of the media landscape and the ways in which they affect our media work? And even more importantly, how could we better help audiences to understand these ongoing changes and effects to their media diet and media life even? So these are some of the big questions that we could start with here. And now I'm happy to give the floor to Jessica next. Thank you.
Thank you, Salla and Mikko, for this contextualization. A good kickoff for the remaining discussion. We'll be now hearing from Jessica Edlom.
Thank you. I will start my presentation. Is this okay? Do you see it?
Yes, we do.
Good. So I'm Jessica Edlom. I'm a PhD student in media and communication at Karlstad University in Sweden. And this is part of my thesis work. And the article I've written is called The Engagement Imperative, Experiences of Communication Practitioners, Brand Work in the Music Industry. It is part of a research project of the Scandinavian music ecosystems and industry. And the study is about understanding promotional practices and worker experiences and how they manage the fluidity of changing context, as you have described, Salla. And my overall question was, how do the requirements to produce engagement affect communication work and workers in the terms of their roles, responsibilities, competences, ethics, and their identity of being a communicational professional within the music industry? And I've done ethnographical work, and I've done a lot of interviews with people on different levels and different kinds of work within the music industry, but also with audiences, actually. But this is from the interviews with the practitioners. So shortly about the music industry and the communication work within it. The music industry has been called lately the social music industry. And due to trends the last decades, the music industry has adapted to conditions of the internet, of course, and learned the benefits that social media and digital platforms provide. And as a consequence, active and co-creative music consumers and fans are sought for. They are also used and taken for granted in order to build strong brands via social media, of course. Fans' engagement around music artists on social media and over digital platforms overall is seen as central, and fans are seen as both drivers in the communication and marketing, and at the same time as tools, if you can say so. When it comes to communication strategy and when it comes to the actual communication work, there is a need of trying to strategically steer the audience in certain directions. You set up a marketing plan and you more or less put up breadcrumbs for the audience just to follow through the marketing campaign. And you hope for them to do that, of course. And you also hope to gain certain types of behavior around the artist brands. But it's a fast-paced setting that is also kind of hard to understand. And you have to follow the audiences, you have to interact with the audiences, and what do that do with the strategy, with the communication strategy? Well, it goes from quite linear strategy, which was before, to a more fluid one, where you don't really know what is going to happen. You can lay out a strategy, but then it's join the ride, more or less. And to add, there is also a kind of complex setting within the music industry ecosystem. You have the platforms as one kind of actor, you have the music companies, the managers, the agents, and the communication practitioners that work within them. And the work practices are really professionalized today. They're working with deep communication strategies, and there are also struggles with big data, audiences flows, and struggles of control as well. Because you also then have the artists as an actor that are working with these music companies that also have to be like personal in social media and interact with the fans directly through the strategy, but also outside it. And you have the audiences that are participating, that are engaged, and hopefully co-creating with marketing. So what do we see then as a result, and what can I detect from my study? Well, the accelerating demands of a relational, fast, competitive and technology-driven and also liquefied work environment puts high pressure on individual communication practitioners. New competences, skills, practices, and work methods and tools are constantly demanded. And both broad competences and excellence are required, as well as being many things simultaneously. You need to be a strategic communicator, content creator, coach for the artist on the platform as well at the same time. And there are also a lot of new work titles and new work roles that we have never seen before. And although communication practitioners are supposed to be experts in digital communication and consumer targeting, they express a lack of deeper understanding of the new work requirements. One I interviewed said it's a one big learning curve, and another one said you can never let the guard down. So work changes place a larger demand on everybody involved, and this also affects the professional self-image and the professional identity of the communication worker, as I see it. So it's as one said, kind of a need of being a Superman, or having this kind of Swiss tool mentality when working with this. And one thing that the interviews also express is that they see that it's some kind of engagement imperative, as I call it. The communication professional is seen as some kind of key player between the music company, the audience, and the platforms. But the constant striving to build engagement is often seen as challenging, and to create relationships, interesting content, and appear interesting to audiences is what you have to deal with. One interviewee, head of creative, a new title, noted, we need to live in the same world as a target group. We need to inject our presence there. It is an unwritten part of our work description to increase the numbers of followers and to keep the fans active. So it's central in the work description. And the demands to create engagement and all the competencies needed to do this are seen as a duty or an imperative, as something that practitioners just have to do. It's the most central thing to do. To be a social communicator and to create dialogue and co-creation around the brand in the brand's interest. The communication work centers on approaching and pleasing the audience to increase and cultivate fan engagement, to tie in with the fan base, to get a following, to amplify, trigger, target, and to steer and drive subscribers and traffic. And the aim is making social marketing smarter and more streamlined, as one said, to serve music brands, of course. There are some ethical implications here for both audiences and communication workers. Audience engagement translates into free marketing, and audience are used to drive the marketing or the buzz around an artist brand. And audience can also, of course, be seen as working for the brand, being exploited. But this is something people I've been talking to only partly questions. One interview said that the audiences are doing work that means that we can spend less. We're actually using them. One of the interviewees said, VP of Strategy is his title. So audiences are often not either involved or told regarding how their engagement is used in marketing campaigns, or told about the prerequisites. Some respondents in the study expressed that they want to reflect ethical and empathetic behaviors, but there are not much more time to be empathetic or focusing on the human behind the number, behind the big data numbers you're collecting and trying to analyze. There's not time to be subjective or critical to how it's working. There's a lack of ethical competences and ethical guidelines, many of whom I've been talking to express. Focus instead lie on being analytic and strategically analyze the data that engagement brings. The goal of engagement is effectiveness rather than participation, or really engagement that serves the audiences. And also the tempo, the complexities of everyday work performances entangled in digital platform structures, big data flows, and network relationships make it hard to focus on social and ethical factors, as I see it. The context also makes it hard for the communication practitioner to question and change the prerequisites for the work. So what are the impacts on society and people's lives? I got a question about trying to answer this. And well, as I see, when focus is on the high pace, the flexibility, deep strategy, numbers that audiences produce, and the human perspective gets lost. You need to look behind the numbers, look at human experiences, both the audiences and the communication practitioners, as I see it. And this also ties into the discussion about how the data we all contribute to on social media is used by industries and in society at large. As a music fan or a consumer, it is hard to overlook the small click or comment and what it contributes to in the long run. And I think we need more discussions about how the data we all contribute to on social media is used. And also, of course, this study has been about understanding the work and work conditions and experiences of being a communication practitioner. But actually, you are a human too, as a communication practitioner, and you're involved in a discourse and in work cultures and environments that you may not feel that you have chosen. It is what it is, and you have to follow and go by the rules. So This is it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, for your presentation. Matthias, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, especially Salla-Maaria and Mikko for organizing this special issue. I just share my screen. So probably you're gonna see my presentation. So yeah, just put it here. Yeah. So yeah, as I said, thank you for having me here. So I'm Mathias-Felipe, and I'm currently invited to research at the Federal University of São Paulo. And this study I conducted while I was at the University of Navarra, part of the Deuze project. So the ProPublica data journalism, we are in this paper, in this study, I'm trying to discover how the ProPublica become one of the most awarded news organizations outlet in the world, mainly using investigative data journalism, and how was this configuration in the newsroom, how they are establishing these teams. So I spent there like was supposed to be like 1 month, but I spent just like a week in New York with them because it was just right before the pandemic. And during this time, I could take part on some of the meetings and interview some of the professionals that work in the data teams there to understand the data journalism in the news organizations. Basically, so this starts from the concept of the boundaries of journalism. So understand what is journalism and what it should be. When we have this concept of boundaries journalism, it's very important when we have the emergence of these new actors. And when we talk about journalism, that's very common. And then I'm going to describe later this in the next slides. But the boundaries of journalism is also a way to like excluding others, like using the argument that we need to stay with the values of journalism, so objectivity, ethics, impartiality, and that the other fields don't have or don't understand as a journalist it is. So by establishing these boundaries, journalists are legitimating their work, but also structuring and maintaining their control. And when we are talking about data journalism, when we look to the literature, it's very common we see the description of these multidisciplinary teams that are composed of programmers, journalists, and designers that are working together, working closely together. And this is what we are seeing about the boundaries of journalism. This means I'm bringing other people to work in the field of journalism. This is these multidisciplinary teams is bring some things that are very important for the journalists. For example, the variety of views. They foster innovation, and also promote some innovations in the newsroom. And that's what data journalism did in recent years, in the last 10 years. And ultimately involves the multidisciplinary teams involves a division of labor. So we have people that are responsible for the visualization, others are responsible for the data analysis, and others the production of the text. And when you have multidisciplinary teams, means hiring more people. So means higher salaries because there are professions, but people that are specialized in their field, and others that that have come from another organization. So usually, who can afford the ones that can afford that are the elite news organizations. We can see that New York Times, Washington Post, they have like huge data teams, and also in Europe that it was very common in the literature at the beginning. We have BBC, Financial Times. On the other side, we have this that was very common about the hybrid profiles, where we have these journalists, programmer journalists, journal coders, a lot of names to describe these new nerds that enter in the newsroom. And they are this kind of professional that having this intersection between the journalism and tech knowledge. And they are also being a drive force for innovative news stories, even though they don't have they cannot have the workload of a multidisciplinary team, but they also work as an important tool to improve mainly, for example, in this case, the data-driven storytelling. moving for the next slide. So in ProPublica, data journalism becomes very important, and this is since the beginning. ProPublica is really a unique news outlet because they have a lot of support from donors, and this support came from the recognition of awards that they receive because of their investigative journalism. And the data journalism there is divided in 2 separate teams that work together, and somehow there are overlaps among their tasks. One is the data team and the other is news app team. If we roughly describe them, one is more focused on the analysis, while the other one is more focused on the visualization. And this is a long-term strategy. And I could, when I was like having these interviews with them, I could see that for a long time they are investing on that, and they have a really small team, and they try to bring other professionals. Today they have a dozen of professionals working with the journalism there. And what I was describing in the literature was about having hybrid profiles or in multidisciplinary teams. In ProPublica, we have both. They try to combine both. So in these multidisciplinary teams, they have people with hybrid profiles. So it's not only a journalist, but it's a journalist who knows how to code, or a coder who knows about design, or a coder that knows also how to write text. And this makes it really different from the other news organizations. So they try to bring in the best professionals that they can find in the industry. And even the selection of one of the members of the team was very different, because he posted an investigation that he did by himself, but he was a coder, and also he studied law. And then when he did this investigation and he published it, if I'm not wrong, in a Medium post, they recognized that he had the ability to write and also do the analysis. So they said, oh, he could join our teams, and then they had the interviews and saw that he could, they hired him. And there is another important thing, because when you have these multidisciplinary teams, it's important to have this collaboration. And in ProPublica, this happens at different levels, not only in the teams that work really close with each other, but also with other, news desk, other journalists around the news organization. And also, what I'm going to describe later, they have these partnerships and collaboration with other news outlets. That's very important. And when they involve the data team in these investigations. And another thing that is very during my observation I could see there is an increased specialization also, that they try to delimit somehow what the data journalism does, and this is somehow a part of these boundaries of journalism. And when they are working with a journalist, they usually don't write a lot about the text, and who does that is a journalist, and their writing is limited to the visualizations where it's necessary. So how they can have like impact with this data journalism? First, they are trying to make this impact locally, trying to work with other organizations, and because ProPublica is not a website that they have like a traditional newsroom that they have news stories daily. They have daily, but not a lot. So they work with other newsrooms that have a wider audience, so they can reach other public, and mainly local news outlets that they can, get these unique investigations that they could not, the small news outlet could not be done by themselves, and the same with ProPublica. So when they join these forces, they can produce really unique investigative stories. And for example, they publish a lot with the mainstream outlet, New York, Washington Post, and then these huge investigations. And they have this local reporting network that is a project that they bring professionals for around 20 newsrooms. And they like each year-long project where the ProPublica pays the salary for this professional. And they have all the help of the research team, the news app team, and the engagement team, so they can work closely and sharing the knowledge and exchange while the professional in this local news outlet can describe their issue, they can provide ideas on how to investigate that. And they also have partnered with the Texas Tribune and to have like a 5-year project, if I'm not wrong, where 10 people will only cover about Texas, and they will have work together with ProPublica. In this way, ProPublica not only promotes data journalism, but also in their newsroom, but also beyond their newsroom, sharing the knowledge and also their experience with other newsrooms. Besides that, I think one important factor that has ProPublica on their data journalism is that collaboration. It's not only about like something that is just for one project, it's a cultural thing. So they have this on their mind. And these different teams, they work really to complement each other with their knowledge that they don't have, and mainly these hybrid profiles. So it makes they have a data journalism really strong in their newsroom. And lastly, even though we have this specialization to somehow establish some of boundaries of the profession, they know how to overlap somehow these, and they don't want that their data teams be service desk. So they work really to push that, to understand that we can collaborate with other journalists in the newsroom. So we can do the analysis, we can find sources, and we can contribute in the analysis as well. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias, for your presentation. We'll be hearing now from Deuze.
Yes, good day. Thanks everybody for joining us as speakers, as participants. I'm really thrilled to be part of this. The special issue was really wonderful. I love the focus on the focus on everything that is changing across different fields in the media industry, and the striking parallels of what's happening, whether you're in data, in games, in community engagement, in journalism, or wherever you are. Things are happening that really seem part of a broader trend that affects media professionals all over the place. And to me, that very much underscores the need. And I think many of us also here in the chat are also educators as well as researchers. And most of our students come to us because they want a job in the media industry somewhere. The need of telling the story of how, regardless of whether you're a journalist or a game developer or a community manager or an activist somewhere or working in any kind of big company, this is the kind of stuff that you're going to be facing. And how do we do that? How do we deal with that? I just want to make 2 or 3 very brief comments of things that I've taken from this special issue, and that were for me sort of aha moments, and that I've immediately also used in my own teaching. Today is actually the last teaching day of a course that we're offering here at the University of Amsterdam on what's it like to work in the media, and this special issue was deeply informative for that course. So one thing that I really took from the special issue and Salla-Maaria and Mikko's introduction specifically is this notion that every organization is a media organization, right? That we traditionally define media industries in ways of, journalism, that's a bunch of newsrooms, and advertising, that's a set of agencies, and game development is a bunch of studios and those kind of things, and which is, and I'm sure that's the general picture that students draw as well of what media industries are, but it really isn't. That's sort of the tip of the iceberg. And we all know from most of us who study journalism that the number of journalists who actually work in newsrooms is like minute compared to the thousands and thousands of journalists that do all kinds of other things all over the place in all kinds of different types of professional identities. So every organization is a media production firm, makes media more or less professionally. And every media producer, professional media producer, it has become a brand, whether they like it or not. I mean, whether they are, of course, are challenged, as Jessica says, with the engagement imperative, or what Nancy Bain says, doing the relational labor that's required to not just do what you want to do, let's say play the violin, but also, market yourself outside, build a persona, have a following, and so on and so forth. But it's not just that. it's both marketing yourself, marketing your audience, and it's not just marketing. It's also very much simply telling people what you're doing. I mean, we like one of the papers in the journal by Brooke, among others, talking about how so much of social media work is about producing visibility but remains invisible. And a significant part of what working in the media is about is being visible. Not just to your audiences, but also to your peers and to possible clients and employers. And so this notion that everybody is doing the work as well as talking about the work in the context of platforms and social media really struck a chord with me. Now, thirdly, something that doesn't really come out of this special issue, but it's something that I've really felt very strongly in these last couple of weeks with the horrible war that is going on in the background of all of this, is that everybody's become a media producer, right? I mean, the one thing that really strikes me about this war, beyond the horrendous nature of the war itself, is the fact that you know, young or not so young influencers and TikTokers and vloggers from Ukraine that up until a month ago were posting, you know, dance videos or them going to the gym and everything, now post videos of themselves in army fatigues with guns, but still with cool soundtracks and filters and with high definition cameras. And it's the amount of semi-professional media production at all levels, both from propaganda machines, you know, Putin's regime, to the handheld videos by President Zelensky, down to, you know, a 15, 16-year-old girl who was walking down the streets on Twitch live streaming when the first bomb started to fall. And this notion that we're all now in this business of making media, whether we like it or not, making media as well as trying to get visibility for what we're doing and becoming part of an entire economy of making media really sort of just hits home to me. That when we talk about media production and media work, we're actually talking about something that affects everyone. And I've always felt very strongly that if we want to understand what we can do in an environment that's suffused with media, we have to start with studying media work, not with audiences. And this special issue really underscores that for me and teaches me a lot. A second comment, this is my final comment, that I would like to make based on the special issue and the presentations today. Has to do with this this notion of what we've been talking about a lot until now, right? The platform logic, platformization, the engagement imperative, participatory culture. I mean, the relational labor. These concepts, a convergence culture, as Henry Jenkins coined it earlier. There's a lot to all of this. But what is central in all of this is the role of tech companies in the tech sector, right? And the Facebooks and the Googles and the Meta and the Alphabets, I should say, and the Tencents and those companies. And I'm reminded of work by somebody that I guess a lot of us are familiar with, which is University of Warwick's Chris Bilton, who's written quite a few books and papers on this, where he says that as a media professional, if you want to survive in the future, especially in a future that is increasingly determined by a platform logic, one way of doing that is, as in his words, reclaim the relationship with your audience, right? Don't outsource it to platforms, which is what inevitably happens if we keep doing all the things that I've just been mentioning. And so how do you do that? And this is for me where the ambivalence comes in, right? On the one hand, this platform logic, this engagement logic, this imperative of engaging and participating has a dark side. And I think we've talked about this today quite carefully, and in especially as well. On the other hand, that's exactly what we need to invest in our communities, in reaching out to audiences, in co-creation, to reclaim that relationship, to prevent it from being colonized by these new intermediaries. And I think that's a real interesting sort of tension that I would love to see us talk about in one way or another. And I was struck by this comment, I think, Jessica, you made about your respondents talking about, well, if I have to keep up with all of this, I have to be a Superman or a Superwoman, right? This is way too much for any one person to handle and to be on top of. And I think that's where the trap is for media professionals, because they approach the whole social media and community engagement aspect of their work like they approach storytelling, which is, you know, their primary business, which is they want to do it perfectly, right? They approach it as craft. So you don't put a half-assed story on the front page of your newspaper, right? You work on it, you file it, you edit it, you keep polishing it, and you get better at it over time. That's how professionals think about reaching out to communities and audiences, especially through social media. It's a sort of a craft logic, the logic of control. And I think that's the whole point. We have to let that go, right? The messaging online and through social media and is like building community offline. It's not perfect. It's actually very messy. It's about being a human being. And a human being doesn't communicate perfectly with every tweet, just without any errors and with perfect emoji and everything. No. That's actually the recipe for inauthenticity. So I think that's where I thought of as a way of moving through the ambivalence between, oh my God, there's social media stuff, I have to be a Superman, Superwoman, and I'm dealing with these platforms on it all the time. And on the other hand, well, I have to reclaim the relationship with my audience, otherwise Meta and Alphabet are going to do it for me, right? And how do you do that? It's actually by embracing imperfection, by just being a human being and messing up now and then and not being perfect. And I think that's a really hard lesson to learn from media professionals, but I see promise in that. And finally, because as some of you may or may not know, I'm an optimist. I have a hard time staying critical for too long. So one thing that I'm really encouraged by, because there's a lot of things that we can point to as scholars and educators to say, well, this is not going all too well in the industry. For professionals, this is, you know, it just leads to more precariousness and more exploitation and more pressure and more, you know, confusion and uncertainty about what your role and identity is and all that kind of stuff, right? It's easy to point to those things and it's important to do so. But what I'm really heartened by is what I see as one of the most interesting developments in the last couple of years in all media industries, is that media professionals, in the face of all this pressure and exploitation and precarity, are increasingly organizing themselves. And that is partly traditionally through joining unions and so on, and professional associations, but also in all kinds of other ways. I mean, even YouTubers are forming a union, right? Fairtube, and you've got an alphabet workers union around the world now with close to 200,000 members, 160,000. No, wait a minute, not 160,000 members, but that's who they're communicating with. You see in the game industry a huge organizational push in the face of all the sexual harassment and misogyny cases, for example, at Blizzard and Activision, or Weta Digital in Australia had a case like that as well, and it led to a huge worker organization. And I think that is really interesting, and really, I mean, and it's a field of research that we need to look into, and I think it's also something that we as scholars can support. Right, rather than simply documenting what's going on, what can we do? And that's my last comment. Leave you with the advice that I give to all my students, which isn't from me, but is it from media professionals that I interview? It's like, oh, please, 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 don't think you should or can do this alone. Find support with peers and with others, form communities, and you'll be stronger for it. So anyways, those are my three, and thanks so much again for having me, and congratulations for this really great special issue.
Thank you, Mark, for your remarks and these very interesting ideas here in discussion. Salla and Mikko, before we jump to the questions, can we hear like some of your What do you think about Mark's comments on this? Salla first, perhaps.
Yeah, I can start. Thank you so much for the reflections, Mark. I'm particularly happy that you kind of brought up the recent world situation and all the kind of the media work as we indeed see from directly from the battlefield and from the Ukrainian side in particular. And I think that's a really good reminder. I think I like briefly addressed that idea that maybe we are all media workers, but indeed we are, and it's become really evident during the past month actually already. And actually also there, now that you also discussed the power and role of the platforms, which is obviously another super important and interesting topic and something where my own work is really closely connected to. And kind of, I guess we should keep in mind that all the individual media work, even what we do, is also kind of directed by those platforms to some extent, and kind of these global conflicts or the situation in Ukraine, for example, now brings it really visible how everything what we see from the war actually is to a large extent somehow moderated through the platforms. And now we've been seeing really interesting developments in that sense, how these companies are kind of taking up some new roles as like global players in global geopolitics, which they kind of have tried to actually stay far away from earlier, but now they are kind of forced to finally do that. And maybe also this idea of the imperfection that you mentioned that I really liked, and I think that's a really good message for many media workers in the journalistic sector as well. And maybe that's actually something where we could learn from many of those individuals as media workers and all that kind of well, obviously the social media influencer industry is getting really professional already, but kind of where all that started from was out of imperfection, basically. That was kind of the original culture on YouTube, for example, and it's still kind of alive somewhere. And I think we see it now again when we have like a lot of more people who are kind of becoming active in the global situation, like in a global crisis. And we kind of see that in authenticity again. And we'll also maybe see the value of that in the current media environment and in the, I mean, all the hybrid media system when we're following and trying to understand what is going on in Ukraine in particular.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark, for your wonderful words, and also to Jessica and Mathias-Felipe for great presentations. Actually, there are many points I could sort of touch on, but I think the last issue that Mark talked about on reminding me of the Happiness Project, where you are also involved. I think it's called that name, where what focuses on the well-being of media workers in these kind of difficult and challenging circumstances that we are encountering. And that's one very important issue. And I'm happy there's now sort of a community gathering around these issues on well-being and sort of also happiness, actual happiness in media work. The other thing, I think it's also brings sort of, we're talking about that all of us can be media workers, and of course an important backdrop for this is the platforms, social media. And there has been also all this critical talk about social media, how they're really toxic, and if media organizations should deplatform, I mean, get separate from or develop a distance to these platforms, and also if ordinary sort of people should disconnect them from social media, because it's in many ways toxic and evil and causes a lot of polarization in the world. But then again, this case of the war in Ukraine, I think we can see now the kind of the good sides of social media and the good sides of all of us being media workers when you compare to the toxic nature of legacy media, traditional media in Russia. I mean, of offering this totally twisted, absolutely non-true image or information about the war. And there we again see the power of the people, power of the social media offering this other view. So it's kind of, for me, I think still about a month ago, I was very critical towards social media platforms like Facebook or Meta, for foremost, but now I kind of maybe going back in this kind of the dark participation, those Quant's article where you can see both sides of, okay, sometimes the social media is kind of evil and dark, but then the other hand, you can see also the positive aspects. So I think it's interesting to see this. And I'm sort of thinking also, I mean, we just finished this special issue, but I'm still already looking forward that if maybe this, if we don't have any other questions from the audience, that if we would do with Salla co-edit another special issue on media work in 5 years, which topic should we then, you know, search for and try to include in the special issue? It's a broad question, and just in case I know other questions don't surface.
Thank you, Mikko and Salla. Actually, there was one question that I received earlier. It was mentioned by Salla in her presentation. Jessica mentioned too in her study, concerns about the ethics in these new media. I would like to hear your thoughts on this. It's a question by James Anderson at Northumbria. He asks, what ethical considerations do new media raise? So we talked about this for now. Mark, can we hear your thoughts on this? Some new ethical considerations that might arise with this new media.
I mean, I would love to hear from all the panelists on this. I mean, the one thing about ethics, and I really appreciate that Jessica ended her presentation with this as well, is it reminds me of this survey that was done a couple of years ago in the United States among the graduates of all the major media and communication programs in the country who are now working in the industry. And it was like 20,000, 25,000 people participated in the survey, all now media professionals across a wide variety of industries. And one of the questions in this survey was, so now you're actually at work and looking back at your university degree, like what is the kind of skill you would need most now, like that you maybe didn't have enough of in school. And then you would think, perhaps some of us would think that, oh, well, this would be something like, you know, data visualization or SPSS and statistical analysis, or, God forbid, programming. Nope. And they actually, the one that I think it was well over 80% of respondents had this as number one, which was ethics. And to me, okay, ethics is a very broad, you know, it could be anything, but from my own research and maybe I would love to hear other people comment on that. So what does that mean? What is the ethical challenge in this particular context? And I think also related to the Happiness Project, Mikko, that you so kindly referenced, it is all about boundaries, right? Both protecting your own boundaries, like how much of yourself do you make visible if the self is a visibility project, right? I mean, that's one strategy media professionals can do to counter precarity, is to turn yourself into a visibility project and making yourself known, not necessarily marketing or promoting yourself, but so where do you draw the boundaries? Like, what do you share? What do you not share? What kind of trolls do you engage with and what not? A question particularly poignant for, you know, female colleagues, for people of color and so on and so forth, who face a much different online environment than I would. And it's also the boundaries about what constitutes work and what doesn't. It's the boundary of when is somebody, you know, a fan or somebody that you co-create with, or somebody that becomes something else, a friend, you know, a lover or whatever. I mean, the boundaries are, it's almost like we love to talk about hybrid, right? A lot. But what we're really saying is like, yeah, we're not really sure what boundaries are anymore. And that is fundamentally an ethical question. And both one of personal ethics, and then in sort of the ethics of your client or employer or brand, and then the ethics of the community that you serve or want to serve. And so to have that, and so sorry, this is a long answer, but my final comment, a very, very dear friend and colleague of mine, Herman Wasserman, professor at the University of Cape Town, published a book last year called On the Ethics of Listening. And I think that was for me really an eye-opener, this notion of that the question of ethics in this environment is one of listening and not of better communicating. right? This is not about telling a better story. It's about being really mindful of how you listen to anybody and anybody, not just online, but in general. And I think listening is a skill, an ethical skill that I for sure know that we don't teach at our university. So anyways, that's just a way of operationalizing the conundrum of ethics.
Thank you, Mark. Salla has a question here for both our authors. I'm going to read so that Matthias and Jessica can address them. Media work is also data work. Data and engagement are related in complex ways. Whether you use data to generate engagement or you observe engagement through data. Jessica, can we hear your thoughts first on this?
Yeah, they are entangled, of course. Data is so central here. When you're doing your communication strategy and marketing work, you're focused on the data that engagement produces. You're following the data to change the strategy. So it's a loop that's going on constantly, as I see it. So it's kind of hard to, as it is today, to separate them.
Yeah, I will add of my experience in ProPublica. They have a team dedicated to look at engagement, even though I didn't have time to explore that thanks to COVID. But yes, it was like a team dedicated to look at engagement, and another one looking only in producing content using data, but not really about what they see in the public, but trying to make impact and how they can measure this impact. This is something that, answering Mikko's question, what we should look in the future. It's like how we measure impact. So what is impacting journalism, you know? And also when we are mentioning about data journalism specific, there's a lot of ethics behind the data. How we analyze that, what is the risk that will bring for the people? Because we need to be transparent in data journalism. We need to provide the data, but this also brings risk. How you can balance that? And also in the future, we're going to have much more about artificial intelligence. So in the next special issue, probably going to have something about that and how we balance that, the ethics of that, and also engagement and how people are understand there is a machine like behind all the story or the data product or something that you created. So yeah, it's a lot of questions that are still open, but I think it's a future that technology is still playing an important role in journalism as it is right now, and maybe even more. And as Mark was saying, today it's like almost no one leaving the university and going to a newsroom, and maybe in the future even less, because we're going to have a lot of automated journalism. How we still make the quality of the journalism is not the same a story that has a structure and we are copying and somehow just swapping the order. So yeah, it's a future that has a lot of questions.
Thank you, Matthias, for your answer, and Jessica as well. I am afraid we are reaching the end of the webinar for the discussion. Two final notes before we go. First of all, this webinar was recorded and the final version will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. All the attendees will be notified of this video very, very soon when it is on. Also, a second note, so as mentioned several times, this webinar was based on a thematic issue we publish in our open access journal, Media and Communication. You can access the issue with this link anytime, anywhere. As always, it's fully open access. I would like to thank our speakers, Mikko and Salla, for putting up this webinar, Matthias and Jessica for a presentation, and of course, Mark, for your most valuable remarks to the presentations and the topic. I would also like to thank the attendees for your questions, your thoughts, and your interactions with our speakers. I'll see you all in our next webinar. Thank you very much.